So grief is something that I started doing more research on, like from a community perspective, with the pandemic, the heartbreak of people not being able to be with their loved ones and not being able to have a celebration for a number of years, that impact that it was having on the ability to grieve in healthy ways just stood out to me. And so we're going to share a little bit of the history, but this is a big fundraiser item for us, because we really want to dive into creating resources. We did a presentation a couple of sessions ago around the brain care, self-care suite of resources, and we have about 5 different pieces in that suite of resources, and we are hoping to have that for our grief resources. So I am Velshana Lucky, Director of Engagement for Self-Healing Communities of Greater Michiana.
And my name is Tom Kraffel. I'm currently a near-peace science intern with Self-Healing Communities. And I have been on the team since about the fall of my sophomore year. And I've been last year during the spring, it was my first time that Velshana tasked me with diving into grief and the neuroscience behind grief. So I worked on it all of the spring semester last year. And then also this summer, that was a big part of my work with Self-Healing Communities in South Bend. And so it has really been, I've learned a lot the last year or so that I've been working on grief, and some things that I hope that you will find interesting, and some things that I hope that you will find beneficial within your grieving experiences. And so a large part of this work and stuff that I've done, but also I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work of Aisha Gibson. She graduated in 2022 from Notre Dame. And then Olivia Shank, who is currently part of the team, but she's in London right now. And so she'll return in the spring and be a near-peace science intern and kind of like take the spot that I'm in right now. And then Karina, who I'm sure that you've met today, she's our Self-Healing Communities coordinator, and she graduated last year. And the 3 of those awesome people put together a lot of this grief work as well. And so I really hope that you enjoy it today, because there's some really, really helpful information within this presentation.
And our grief logo there was designed by Olivia, who was our first intern. And then we have other images that will go with our resources that our current illustrator, Tahira, has put together and did some beautiful research around colors and healing and things of that nature. So we're excited that in the future, we'll share a lot more about that.
Yes.
So our Self-Healing Communities mission is to nurture personal and community well-being through the neuroscience of human resilience and the celebration of our collective strengths. When it comes to grief, a lot of time people don't look at grief as being a strength. But in order to, from my own personal experience and a number of friends and family, and with therapy, it is a strong effort that you have to take to allow yourself to grieve. Sometimes it feels easier in the short term to shove it away, but to be able to honor loss is a strength. And that's what we want to do in our community. And you'll see some of the myths and the stigmas that we are hoping that people will move away from. So again, really, really want to just encourage the well-being of all of us and help us understand that resilience isn't just the word. It really is something that happens within our body. And as we talk about the grief, you'll see the benefit that will come from all of this work. So our vision is to increase protective factors through the region, especially people having 1 to 2 caring adults. So that's every citizen, not just children, that adults recognize that, yes, they are protective factors, but they also need protective factors. And so we encourage people to think about their networks, who do they have that they can call out to. I know from the research that I saw, it kind of just broke my heart to imagine that there are people who don't have 1 to 2 trusted, caring adults. And so we really are working intentionally for that not to be the case in our community. And hopefully across the world, we can help elevate this research. Our goal is to teach everyone in our community to care for themselves and each other in a way that prioritizes the caring for our nervous system. So we are about teaching. Most people don't even, I know when I first heard it, what is the nervous system? And so that is a part of our goal, is that we have this understanding that when we see someone, we know that there's a lot more going on. Dr. Michael talks about, we don't know people's story until they tell us. And so when we see another person, we're hoping that people will be thoughtful and caring and understand that we have a robust nervous system operating inside of all of us.
Yeah, and so a big part of grief right now is there's definitely a negative stigma that Velshana mentioned there, touched on, is that people view grief as almost a sign of weakness or something that you maybe shouldn't do, or just like at least not publicly. And I think it's really important to start off this presentation about grief, addressing that stigma and kind of finding the holes that really make that not be true. And so, as the slide says, grief is accompanied by a negative stigma. Our culture even looks down upon those who grieve. And so we must address it immediately, as our bodies are biologically programmed to grieve, and it is a normal response to loss. So I think one thing that people really don't understand to grieve is that I think most people view it as as a psychological thing. That's like when somebody passes away, you become sad. And that is definitely a part of grief. That is 100% a part of grief. But what they don't know is that there is truly a physical element behind it as well. Your brain, as we'll discuss in the coming slides, your brain actually has to readjust. And so you're biologically programmed to grieve. And so it's a completely normal response. And so when people know that, when people realize, okay, this is actually what's supposed to happen, I think the stigma starts to go away, or at least people start to understand it better. And so this is like a lot of the times where these myths come from, is like, if you ignore the pain, it goes away faster. As you'll see in the coming slides, that's just not how it works. Or be strong when you experience loss. Like, yes, you can be strong, but you can also let yourself feel the emotions of grief. And that's a big part about all of this. I'll just kind of run down the list, but if you don't cry, you don't care. Some people don't cry when in response to grief, and that's also okay. Everybody grieves individually. It takes 1 year to move on. As we'll see, there's not a set time frame for grief. And I think some people, it might take a year, but some people it might take 2 or 5 or the rest of their lives, and that is okay. Grieving is synonymous with forgetting. I think this is one of my favorite ones, because the beauty of grief is that you never have to forget. And I think that is something that is really comforting in people. A lot of people know the 5-step grieving process. Throughout all this research, I've actually been really surprised to know or to see how many people like, oh, like I say, I'm researching grief, and they're like, oh, the 5 steps. And I'm like, yes, but also no. And so we'll kind of dig into that as well. And then grief is not physical. As I mentioned before, it's truly, truly physical. There's definitely a lot of things going on in your brain that we'll analyze in a little bit. So this is a great quote. Grief finds a place in our lives again. Imagine a world in which we honor that place in ourselves and others rather than hiding it. So like Elshana mentioned before, like if we can celebrate grief and use it as one of our strengths, like, can you imagine the compassion that we might have for each other, or the compassion that we might have for ourselves, and just really the joy that we can bring to this world and to each other. And so I think that quote kind of encapsulates it all really well.
So the Self-Healing Communities Grief Project is really aimed to help at a community level. Yes, at an individual level, but really thinking about what Tom just said as far as how we will show up and offer compassion when people are facing grief, and understanding that it's not a situation where we have to ignore it. I know one time years ago, over probably 2 decades ago, I did a training with adolescent grief, and it just stuck with me how they were like, children get really, when they surveyed them, they were upset when people didn't want to talk about it and just go on. And when I was in grief counseling, there was a lady, and she was like, people just wanted to act like nothing had happened. And though it was hard, it was helpful to be able to have those conversations. So being able to mourn is a part of the healing process. And what we want to do is elevate the message that it takes time to heal, and it's okay. And it's not just from like a physical death. There's grief in lots of ways, and we have a beautiful slide that will show you that. And we want to celebrate grief as a process and reduce the stigma. And also, the biggest thing is offering tools to help people navigate. One of the things that I found in the work of self-healing communities is how powerful awareness is. When I have conversations with people on many different levels, and they're like, what? That's not strange? Oh, that, like, there's actually something going on inside of me. And when it comes to grief and the neurobiological connection, we like to say that grief is just a feeling. It's just an emotion. And we don't even honor that. Yes, grief and emotions do also show up in our body. There is this real thing that's going on in our nervous system. So our project is centered around being able to host events, as well as have resources that we can send home with family members, and not just the people who may be grieving, but their support system. Oftentimes, part of the stigma is that everybody else around them feels uncomfortable and they don't know what to do. So we want to just think about, again, everyone in the community, and be intentional about how we get to create resources and make space for grieving.
And so, as Velshana mentioned, the image that represents all the different types of grief. Olivia Shank, who we mentioned earlier, who did the grief image on the very first slide, she also did this, and it truly is a beautiful image that represents over 20 different types of grief. And so, I think the biggest thing to take away here is that you don't have to understand what forgotten grief is, or acute grief, or abbreviated grief. Like, that's not necessarily the point of this image, but the point is to understand how many different types there are and how different it can look for each person. So whether you might lose your job, or break up with a significant other, or experience a death in the family, anything like that, you can grieve so differently. And it's not like, if it happens to me, the same thing happens to me and Velshana, it's not going to look the same way in terms of our grief. We're going to grieve two incredibly different ways, and we can learn from each other. We can bounce ideas off of each other, but there's not just one way that works for everybody. And I think this image does a really good job of representing how many different ways there are to grieve. And like, you can definitely look into each one, and maybe that helps you to figure out how, maybe like offer ideas as to different ways that you can grieve. But it really just represents the versatility of grief and the lack of just one straight method to grieve. And so, as we just saw, there's over 20 different types of grief, yet there are also 3 elements of grief that remain the same in each one of those different types. So we'll kind of go through it one by one. The first one is loss. And so these include loss of normality, the loss of what could be, the loss of what we thought we knew or understood about something or someone. So this is kind of just the initial, like, wow, what happened. And so it's like everything that was normal in your life is no longer that way. And so it's just like the very initial stages. Okay, this is what happened. This is a lot to take in. And no matter what type of grief it is, there will be some element of loss. And the second one is longing. So this is an involuntary yearning for wholeness, for understanding, for meaning, for the opportunity to regain or even simply touch what we've lost. So I think this is really profound in just the sense that like now they're gone, but wow, do I really want them back? I want to do everything I can, or at least find a reason for why they left. And if you are spiritual, you might try to find that reasoning in God, or even become mad at God, or just something that explains why that person or why that thing happened to you. And again, like every type of grief will experience some type of longing or some type of wanting to discover what the purpose of the grief or purpose of the loss is. And then finally, is feeling lost, is reorienting every part of our physical, emotional, and social worlds, finding a new normal. And so what this means is like, it's the where do we go from here stage. So it's like this event happened. Now what am I going to do? And so I think and the title of the element is truly feeling lost. And a lot of the times you don't know where you're going to go and you don't know what you're going to do. And I think that's a big part of grief is being not really being okay with that, but being okay and understanding that this is going to happen. Like it's very normal to not know what's next. It's very normal to like feel uncomfortable in this situation. And so just to know that you're not alone, to know that everybody experiences all of these elements, regardless of where you are in this three-step process. It's not definitely not linear, but just regardless of where you are, to know that like other people are experiencing the same thing.
And to connect with our 1 to 2 trusted and caring adults, when that statement of finding a new normal, that was constant when my mother passed away with me and my sister. So I am the middle of 5 girls, and I have 2 younger sisters, and the 3 of us really almost walked step by step with each other as much as possible. And the delayed grief was different for one. We were able to go on a retreat for daughters remembering together. And I look back now when I see these elements like, wow, yes, I remember that. And still there are some days and some situations that'll come up, and all 3 of us will text each other and like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this loss, or man, how am I remembering like when mom would normally be doing this right now? And for my youngest sister, it is when the time changes. So we just had a time change, and 2 of my sisters, we were all in a group together, was like, this is when mama would normally be telling us and reminding us to move our clocks. And so embracing that that's okay all of these years later, and now having this research behind it, it's just so beautiful when we have those moments together. We might even be crying, but I call it beautiful.
And so that kind of brings us perfectly into the next point, is the timing of grief. And as the slide says, there's no set amount of time for how long one should grieve. For many, it takes a couple weeks. For some, it might take several years. And I think the beauty of all of this work that we do with self-healing communities is that no, we can't tell you like it will reduce your timing of grief by 2 years or 5 months or whatever it might be, but we can tell you ways that it just might help. And so, for example, Velshana has her 2 sisters that she can rely on to like, they can all kind of come together when the time changes and be with each other. Just having those 2 trusted adults or those 2 protective factors to allow you to just really find comfort in your healing and know that you're not alone can bring you so much help and so much healing along your grieving journey. And it's not just the 2 trusted adults, but it can be anything. It can be any of the 6 brain care tips that we have. So simply listening to your body, knowing when or like feeling when you can, like, you're starting to become sad. Okay, these are some steps that I can take. or maybe you're having some pent up anger regarding it and like the feeling lost stage that we just talked about. All right, maybe I need to move or go for a walk or something to clear my head. And just simply knowing about these protective factors that you can implement into your life can really bring you a long ways. But again, if it takes you a long time to grieve, it's completely normal. You can't get flustered about that. You can't wish or compare yourself to other people. Grief is truly so individual that it's just, you kind of have to walk your own walk and know that other people are going to be there with you to help you through it.
And I like that it says a couple of weeks. You know, I've had people who felt guilty that it hasn't taken them a long time, and like, are they missing something or all of these other things? And it's like, no, that is not a bearing for saying you grieve or didn't grieve. And
Right.
again, that is the beauty of this work. And with honoring that, we all are different. And
Yeah.
so the timing, there is no set time.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of goes back to like, if I don't cry, then I'm not actually grieving. That's not how it works. And it's just truly however you grieve is the right way for you, kind of thing.
In a healthy way.
In a healthy way, yes. Right. Okay, so this is where we start to get into the neuroscience. So I want to like say, feel free if you do get confused or I lose you along the way, say something, put it in the chat. We're watching it, and so don't be afraid to stop me. Velshana, you too. um, okay, so I'm going to read the slide and then I'll break it down for us. So the brain is an expecting organ. Brains have a code for different locations and what to expect at each location. So our brain predicts that the person will be there. Yet in loss, it cannot predict the possibility of not having a person in your life because it is outside of your brain's experience. So what that means is the brain is an expecting organ. Your brain, every experience that you've had is based on your previous experience, or every experience has is based on previous experiences or past experiences. So an example or an analogy that I like to use is that, let's say every day you go to school and you come home, you get off the school bus, walk into your house, and your mom makes you cookies every single day. So you get off the bus, you open the door, you can smell the cookies, and then soon enough, you get to taste the cookies. And that's every single day of school that you've had. That's what you know. And so therefore, that's what your brain expects. So Monday, you come home from school. Before you even walk in the house, your brain is expecting to smell the cookies. You're expecting to taste the cookies. So then when let's say your mom passes away, you physically, or you can understand the fact that your mom is no longer there. That is not being questioned in your head, but your brain will not predict the experiences of no cookies because you have not had that experience before. So still, that Monday after your mom passes, when you get off the bus and you go home, your brain is still going to expect the smell of cookies. It's still going to expect you to taste the cookies. And because it hasn't had the chance to expect anything else, why would it expect anything else when that's all it's ever expected? And so that's a big thing about grief, is that it's truly a form of learning. Now that your mom is gone, your brain has to learn to not expect that. It has to learn that those cookies aren't going to be there anymore. And so while it's still good to remember those cookies and to remember those great times that you had with your mom, it's important for your brain to understand that that can no longer be an expectation to have. And so we'll illustrate that again on the next slide, unless you have something else to say, Velshana.
No, this is great.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just
1 second. Karina, can you just let us know if there's something that comes up in the chat for us? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Karina. This is another illustration of the same example. So as you can see in the image, this is your home. We'll say it's your home, and this is a chair that's been there from the very first day that you moved in. The chair has constantly been there. You can walk around it in the dark. You always know that it's there. You always expect it to be there. So then let's say it's been 10 years and you decide to get rid of the chair. the chair is no longer there, but as you can see, when you walk down the stairs and the lights are off and you walk through the space that the chair used to be, it's going to feel weird in your brain. It's going to feel like there should be something there because it expects the chair to be there. Even though you know the chair is not there physically, your brain is still going to expect it to be there. And so that's where that uneasiness comes from, or that even just the feeling of knowing that the chair was there and now it's not. And I think that is another, hopefully a helpful illustration of what happens when somebody dies.
When you first talked about this, it made me think about, I had moved, I've been in my new space for over a year, and I was still turning the same way to turn off a light from a house that I was lived in for 15 years. And every time I would turn the wrong way, I would be like, girl, what are you doing? But after hearing this explanation, I was like, okay, I haven't built enough change in my brain, or however y'all say it scientifically, but it just made me actually have a little more grace for like, oh, I haven't done it enough yet. It seems like, oh, you should not turn that way anymore. But for whatever reason, that process is still within me.
Yeah, but that's a perfect example. Is like you should give yourself grace because you haven't learned it yet. You might know it, but that doesn't mean your brain has learned it, if that makes sense. It's like you really have to hammer home the pathways, the neural networks that we'll talk about, in the sense, okay, this is not there anymore. And the more experiences you have with that, the more you will learn it. So I'm assuming at some point you're going to start to turn the right way to turn your lights off. And that's just because your brain has to learn it too. And so there's absolutely like no reason to feel bad for yourself, because that's a natural thing. And I think that's the purpose of talking about all of this, is like to know that this is a natural thing. So you can't.
And being with all of you all wonderful neuroscience folks gives me permission to realize, wait, there is more going on in this body of mine than what people just normally talk. Girl, just do that, or da da da. So it really is helpful. So yes.
Yeah. And so this is another way to talk about this is, so every person in your life, you have three dimensions of relating to someone, someplace or something. So it could be a dog or a computer, whatever it might be. The first element is space, and that would be where you're going to see them. So that's where you're going to see them next, where you have seen them in the past. So it's kind of like the physical element of physical dimension of relating to them. The time element is when. So that's when you have seen them in the past, when you get to see them next. So it could be one day, or it could be several years before you get to see a person next. And then the third dimension is closeness, or the attachment dimension. So this is like how close you feel to someone, or like this is kind of like, I'm going to have a different relationship with my brother than I will have with this person that I just met on the street. So all three of these are kind of a little confusing, but it's like a braid. So all three of them are interwoven together to form, this is like my attachment to. So like, for example, Velshana, I am seeing her now, but let's do, like, if we weren't on the Zoom, where I'll see her on Tuesday at our next meeting. When? Same thing. I'll see her Tuesday at the next meeting. Closest to attachment, we have formed a great bond over the last 3 years that we've got to know each other. And so all three of those elements are tied together. And so that's my relationship with Velshana. And so the beauty, I guess the big thing to understand here is that when you lose an individual, when somebody passes away in your life, you have to rewire the where and the when dimensions to something else. So instead, I'm not going to see my mom. If my mom passes away, I'm not going to see her at home anymore. I'm not going to see her in a week when I typically visit her. And so this is where spirituality, if you are faithful, you might be like, you can rewire that to think, okay, I'm going to see them in heaven, or I'm going to see them in the afterlife. Whatever you believe, that's what you can rewire it to. And those are the two that have to change. And so I think it's really a really important point to note here is that we don't ever need to diminish or release our attachment dimension to somebody. We simply have to remap the other two. And so um I'm not sure if this is making sense, Velshana. Are you following along? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we know it's complicated. We
yeah,
have more.
yeah. So I think it's comforting to know. I think a lot of people think one of the myths that we addressed at the beginning is that when somebody dies, you have to forget about them. And I want to say here is that is simply not the case at all. You can still remember all of the great memories you had. You can still remember everything that you were able to do, and you never have to forget that. And I hope that brings some people comfort, but instead of forgetting, you just have to remap it. And so when again, this is another great part of experiential learning is that when you walk into your house, the more that you have these experiences where you learn that the cookies aren't going to be there anymore, the more you don't have to dissociate your mom's memory from the cookies, but rather you just have to remember those fondly, but also realize that it's not going to be an everyday occurrence anymore. And so the better that you can dissociate that, that's the whole grieving process. And I don't want to say the word better. I say when you do figure out, when your brain is able to dissociate the where and when dimensions of relating to somebody from the attachment, that is when you find comfort in your grieving.
I know for me, being able to adjust and say when someone passes, or that I can say, okay, how can I continue to honor them? How can I have their legacy live on in me? I love when I talk about my mom and they say, man, I wish I had met her. And I was like, in so many ways you are, it's because of her that I show up in these ways. And it's because of my dad and I have recently a supervisor who passed away. And for me, it was just like, it touched me more deeply than I even realized. And I was like, how can I honor? And one of the ways is I decided to volunteer. And so whenever, in some ways, it changed that where and when and the conversations, but the connection and the honoring of them continues to be there. Karina?
Yeah, so I got a private question asked to me, and I'm going to repeat it to the whole group and maybe answer it a little bit, but hopefully you guys can speak more to it. But they related to this like 3 dimensions of relating to someone. They said, could what you were talking about explain when you have dealt with absences for so long, when a divorce happens, it's hard not to grieve. And I would say yes, in the sense that when you have had more experiences of absence, of having to grieve, it's going to make it easier because you're already trained in that. But simultaneously, every relationship or every loss is so different and unique that one thing might be easier to grieve than the next. And even if I've had a million experiences of grieving something or losing something, there might be something that I lose the millionth in one time that is actually going to be very hard because there was maybe a deeper attachment to it. So while having more experience of grief might make it easier, it really is dependent on this like space, time, and closeness. So I don't know if anyone, Tom or Velshana, you want to say more to that?
I think this brings into another dimension where Dr. Michael talks about the neurobiology of safety. So there is this way in which we are accustomed to being in a certain position. For me, after a while, I had to adjust to not having so much stress in my life, so much to do. In some ways, I missed it, even though it wasn't healthy. I still had to learn how to let myself. It's kind of sounds weird to say it, but it was a little bit of grief that my life had changed, and I had to learn to adjust to this piece. And so the complication of it all is why we want to dive into this. And this is meant to be a much more deeper and richer thing that we would do in the community settings. But I think it's worthwhile, the conversation.
Right. And the only thing I would add to that is just saying, like, I feel like Karina, I know you've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of research, and Belshana, through the grapevine, you've been able to learn a lot. But the moment I experience a loss of somebody in my family, that doesn't mean I'll stop grieving in a week. Like, just because I know all the things doesn't mean that I can, like, it's all just going to happen. Like, my brain still needs time to process, just like everybody else's. So I think the beauty of knowing this stuff is kind of allowing yourself a little bit of grace, or allowing yourself to, like, not beat yourself up as much when you are experiencing the grief. And I think that's the most important part, is that it happens. This is supposed to happen. And so, by even if you experience it more, like you said, like the a millionth and one time that you're gonna experience it, it can hurt you a lot. And so, regardless, I think just understanding the physical dimension of it all allows you to be like, okay, this is all right. This is a normal thing to happen. And so, yeah, I think that's the only thing.
And you could be fine. You could be,
Right.
this is why I love this slide. And this isn't even everything. Like our brains, it's a real thing. All of these attached to like so many different things. This one section right here isn't even in the brain. It's about like the hormonal release system, and one of the things that I like to tell people is like, you could be totally good, and it seems like life is just jamming, and you will smell something or hear a song, or someone brings up something, and all of a sudden all of this rushing in. Now, understand, we do a lot of research around neuroscience, but it can't answer everything, which is why we say we want you to embrace and have the support systems in place so that you don't have to dissociate. You don't have to feel like you're crazy. You can get all of the tools. And again, that's something we want to offer. But this, again, the point of this picture isn't to go into all of the details. The point of this is that I always ask the team, show us. We can't always imagine what the brain looks like because we haven't studied it. And these are just some highlights of all of the parts that are impacted when we are not impacted, respond or get activated. Yeah. Look at me. I'm trying to have some words.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
When it comes to grief. Anything else, Tom, you want to add to this slide before we go to the next one?
No, I think you hit it right on the money. It's just like everything on that slide is truly to represent this stuff is real. And that's just how, like, those, what did we have? 7 things on there, and that's nothing. There's so many more things that are involved. But it does provide a good visual that allows you to see, like, man, this stuff is real. These are like actual things that happen when you're grieving. So I think you did a good job.
Thank you.
And so now it does get a little bit less, hopefully a little bit easier to understand from now. We'll take a step back from the neuroscience. These are just some general symptoms of grief. So whether you've experienced grief or you just want to learn, oftentimes it's accompanied by a general sickness, less sleep, or decreased appetite. And then it's also highly correlated to stress. So you'll see the elevated heart rates, the elevated blood pressure, and even just scatterbrained. And so I think just understanding that these are symptoms, and oftentimes it's the stress response that leads to the general sickness, or the stress response that leads to you overthinking and not being able to sleep, or even just not eating. So by understanding these, you might just be able to recognize, and again, it goes back to listening to your body. One of the brain care tips that we have, it's just understanding these are things that happen. Okay, now how am I going to respond?
And having language for it. We learned the language when my mom passed away about brain fog. Like the first time I heard, I was like, that is a perfect word for it. And nobody, before I experienced it, no one could tell me it. But in living it and hearing the words, it was like, oh, again, the language was like, oh.
Right. Yeah. And so, again, I know I've said it a million times, but the individuality of grief is not something that can be said enough. there's no one method of grief that works right for every single person. It's going to look different for everybody. Just because it's helped me doesn't mean it's going to help you. And so I think it's really important to understand that. But at the same time, oftentimes, like, you can't discount the experiences of past experiences of other people just because grief is individual. So Velshana might have something that really, really works for her, and she might tell that to me. And I can't just be ignorant enough to where I'm like, okay, good for you. But since Tom said grief is so individual, that's definitely not going to work for me. That's not the purpose of this. It's more so just like Velshana said something helpful. Oh, maybe I can try that. If it doesn't work for me, don't get upset and maybe try to find an alternate route. That's the message that we want to spread. And so a lot of the times counselors and therapists, they're there for a reason. They know what they're talking about. By no means do you have to go to them, but it's another great resource to have. And again, sometimes it takes some trial and error. You're going to try a lot of things that will work and you're going to be better because of it, but you're also going to try a lot of things that don't work. And I think you just have to understand that and be okay with that, because it doesn't happen overnight. It can take a really long time, depending on your experience. And so just building in that room for compassion for other people, but as well as yourself throughout this whole grieving process is really important.
And I don't know if it comes up in our other slides or in the for what we're going to do in the community, but the one thing I try to encourage people is not to numb. You know, a lot of people, I want this feeling to go away. It will in time. And we just try to ask people to that's that whole strength, that celebrating the strength. You may have to get some supports to take some of the edge off, depending on how your life is. But a lot of people, they do run to unhealthy things to just get this feeling away. And then it creates a whole nother cycle of unhealthy habits. So that's
Right.
a big thing I like to share.
Yeah. And Velshana, you can probably speak more to this in your own personal experiences, but these are some things that I've found through reading books or through reading some articles, just suggestions on dealing with grief. And I'll just read through them for you. First one, take care of yourself. So again, this can mean a lot of different things for a lot of people, but eat well, whatever that looks like for you. Exercise well. Doesn't mean you have to become a CrossFit junkie and do that all the time, but maybe go for a 10-minute walk or whatever that your exercise that can kind of ease some stress in your life, whatever that is, keep doing it. And then rest. Again, doesn't mean sleep. It can mean sleep, but it doesn't have to mean sleep. This can be, I know Jane's on here. She loves to knit. Something as easy as that, that's very restful and relaxing for her, that can kind of reset her mind. Keep the consistency in your schedule. So maintain the normality of your schedule. Don't add a bunch of things to distract yourself, or don't take away a bunch of the things. Just try to be as consistent as you can in what you normally do. As Velshana was saying, don't try to numb the pain with drugs or alcohol. Keep spending time with friends and family. I encourage you to converse and be open about it. Obviously, it's very hard, and it might be something that you feel more comfortable with as time goes by. But I've talked to a lot of people, and they have said that this is something that has really helped them continue to do the things you enjoy. And lastly, which seems really obvious, but grieve. Let yourself feel the emotions of everything that you're going through. Allow yourself the time to heal, and just be compassionate for yourself. I can't say that enough.
And I want to say where it says continue to do the things that you enjoy and maintaining your normal schedule, there are stages that no,
Yeah.
I do not, I will not. And the guilt of enjoying can sometimes feel like something is wrong. But what I love about this is that this is what you try to aim for. It's been a long time. I've only someone asked me to do a Thanksgiving event, and it's taken me a long time to say yes. And so this year, even though when I was asked, I felt uncomfortable, and I've done Thanksgiving with different people, but for whatever reason, this particular request just seemed like it would be like so festive and so just I don't know, make me miss my parents more. I don't know why. But this year I was like, I'm going to say yes. Even though inside of me, it was like, no, but it's like, no, I have to try to move in that direction. And if it works, like Tom said. And so I do want to honor the fact that sometimes you need to lay down. Grief is work, and you might need to sleep more. I also had to learn grief likes to move. It's like, imagine, I say this about it getting stuck, but going, that exercising, moving, right? Sometimes going for a walk with your tissue in hand is necessary. So, yes, I do want to honor the fact that sometimes you look at this list and you agree like, nope, don't feel like it. Nope, not doing this. But at least do it in community. Let people be aware and work hard not to isolate.
Yeah. And this is very much saying the same thing, but I kind of had some mock interviews or interviews with my family and friends, as well as some community members in South Bend, and just talked about their grieving experiences. And they really are tough conversations to have, but I kind of just asked them what helped you during this process, and what do you wish that you could maybe have done different. And we mentioned almost all of them on the last page, but involve other people to the best of your ability. Doesn't mean tell the whole world or all the people just like people that you trust and people that you're comfortable sharing this information with. Feel free to get them involved, because it can really help just to talk. Keep your daily habits as best you can. And then I know my mom, this one came from her, but just she really cherished the time together with her dad before he died. And again, it's like she was away from home for like a month, and she sacrificed the time with us, but she would never give that time away that she had with her dad. And so I think that's, if not everybody has that option, and I recognize that completely, but that was one thing that she said she was really happy and grateful that she was able to do. And then just remembrance, like Belshana has said a couple times now, it's like there's a lot of little things that remind her of her mom, and it's like, that's good. And like, it's okay to feel sad during those times, and it's not like you shouldn't just shove those feelings to the very bottom. It's like, maybe let yourself cry, or maybe just like celebrate the fact that something reminded you of your parents. So that's something that was really positive for a lot of people. And then negative experiences, isolation, like Belshana just mentioned. Don't try not to just put yourself in the corner and don't talk to anybody. Keep the conversation going, and keep your, like, I'll say, wear your emotions on your sleeve, but just do your best to not suppress everything. You don't have to go through it alone. That's the basis of the negative experiences.
And the more we destigmatize this, the more people will hopefully feel comfortable to wear those feelings. I know our church have what's called Blue Christmas. And one of the things, when I've invited people, they felt embarrassed that they might cry, because a lot of places they go, people get tired of them crying. And I'm like, no, this is a space that you can do it in community. And a lot of the research shares about the beauty of being able to grieve in community. Is this me?
I'm comfortable either way.
You go for it.
Okay, so yeah, these are just some of our goals that we would like to see in the near future. The first one being educate hospice workers on the neuroscience of grief to allow them to understand grief more fully, to aid in their work in patient healing. And then number 2, host interactive community workshops to help reduce the stigma around grief. And so I think primarily the emphasis on hospice workers is that clearly they've surrounded themselves, their whole lives are often built around grief. But I think just like they are experts in like the practicality of grief in the real, what grief looks like in the real world. I think by understanding the neuroscience of grief and understanding the physical component to grief, they might be better able to again, have compassion for their patients, have compassion for themselves, as well as help their patients to have compassion for themselves too. I think there's just really no negative side to understanding more or knowing more about the grieving process, especially when it comes to the neuroscience. Excuse me. And then the last one is host interactive community workshops. Very similar to this. I think people in South Bend, Elshana says that this is like one of the most asked things that's most asked of self-healing communities, is the topic of grief, and just being able to put our information out there, put our research into practice would be really valuable within the community of South Bend and greater Michiana area. And then these are just some fun ideas for how to actually put those into place. I won't go through each of them individually, but there are just some really effective grieving ideas that have other communities have implemented. So most of these are from other communities' experiences. And so something as simple as a candlelight service, or simply a photo wall, or there's a great documentary on grief that I've watched, and just having community gatherings surrounded in grief, excuse me, helps to address the stigma and really can help get the word out there about grief. And so if you see something that you would love to participate in, let us know. We're hoping to get involved with a lot of different organizations, and hopefully put our research out there in a lot of different ways.
So coming up next week, the South Bend Tribune is having a forum on Facebook Live. I will be one of the panelists. There are a number of people who are going to be on the call. Again, that coming together and hearing different voices is really a gift. So I shout out South Bend Tribune for putting some attention on this. And again, join us on Facebook Live November 15th and at 6 p.m. And that is next week. And then also December 5th, we are hosting neurobiological support for navigating the holidays. So it won't be what you saw today. It actually will be much more interactive. There's some really interesting things that we can do in community that will help people, one, honor that when everybody else is being festive and celebrating and putting attention on things, when you're grieving, sometimes there's some guilt, like I want to be happy, but I can't be. And so this is really a time to honor that the holidays isn't the same for everybody. And so we're going to offer some specific tools at that event. We are asking people to register. We are hoping for a very successful fundraiser today, and so that we will be able to have the supplies and the resources to do a number of activities. And so this is on their website. And yes, please get your family, friends, coworkers to register for this. And this isn't just for those who are grieving, it's for those who have even loved ones who may be grieving and they want to learn more about how to support. So again, thank you so much. And are there any questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
Elshana, someone asked for clarity, is it Wednesday the 15th or Thursday the 16th?
It is, sorry, is the correction is, I know it's the 15th.
The 15th.
I got the date. Let's see. Alicia, is that correct? Put in the chat. I believe it's the 15th. Sorry if I put the wrong day.
But then just for clarity's sake.
Okay. Oh, I hear somebody. Can you say it again?
It is the 15th.
Okay, so it is the 15th. So that would be Wednesday.
Yep.
Wednesday the 15th at 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you for catching that. All right. Are there any questions about grief in any way? Anything in the chat? All right. Well, thank you all so much for being with us as we discuss this topic. We have launched our podcast today. Our podcast will be released once a month around the 10th or 11th of every month. And so come back here at 5:35 and listen. It's about 14 minutes. And you can find us on Spotify and a couple of other podcast platforms. So join us. We have things going on today until 8 o'clock. So hopefully be back with us at 5:35. Karina, if you have a slide, I'll let you pull it up. All right. And if you have questions, just drop it in the chat and we'll still pop on and answer them. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back if you've stayed on the Zoom, and welcome to the new people that have joined. This was a longer break than usual, and it came at perfect timing, at least for me, on the East Coast because the sun was setting. So I'm privileged to have this nice little balcony that I got to step outside and enjoy the sunset while drinking some hot water. So really, really happy to have that break at this time. If you've been with us, you've heard me say this, but I'm just going to reintroduce myself. I'm Karina Duffy. I am the Self-Healing Communities Coordinator, recent grad at Notre Dame, studied neuroscience and theology, and been working with self-healing communities since my sophomore year, so 3 years now. And this session is just going to be, not just, but it's going to be our podcast kickoff, which this has been over, I want to say 2 years in the dreaming and making to finally release these podcasts. So last year, I was working really hard with Dr. Michael with recording episodes and other partners with recording episodes. And so we're really, really happy to finally have enough to start releasing them. And so welcome to this launch, and let's get ready. Okay. Also, before I begin, I just want to say that our music was done by an amazing, sorry.
We play it just a little bit.
Hello, everyone. Sorry.
Yeah, the music, it's like it's gonna break up. So, but go ahead, give him his shout out. Yes.
He is an amazing Notre Dame student studying econ and global affairs, but also does music as his passion. And so he contributed his skills and his talents with us by creating the intro and outro music all himself. So he made those beats himself. So really, really blessed to have his creation. So I'm gonna start. Hopefully it works. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Self-Healing Communities podcast, where we give you a deeper understanding of the neurobiology of trauma, healing, and human resilience. This podcast is put on by the Self-Healing Communities of the Greater Michiana region. The Self-Healing Communities of Greater Michiana's mission is to nurture personal and community well-being through the neuroscience of human resilience and the celebration of our collective strengths. This is episode 1, where we will be introducing self-healing communities and talking about what human resilience really is. We will have Dr. Nancy Michael, the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Neuroscience and Behavior in the College of Science for the University of Notre Dame, join us as our guest. Stay tuned. Today, we have Dr. Nancy Michael, the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Neuroscience and Behavior in the College of Science for the University of Notre Dame, and we will be introducing self-healing communities and diving into human resilience. Hi, Dr. Michael.
Hi, Karina.
So my name is Karina Duffy. I work as the Self-Healing Communities Coordinator. I've been working with self-healing communities since my sophomore year, and I am now a senior. And so, yeah, Dr. Michael, in your own words, can you tell me what self-healing communities is?
I can sure try. Self-healing communities really is an idea, I think, more than anything. It's formally a community capacity building movement based and 20 years of data in Washington State. But what's really unique about it is it leads with our understanding of what human biological systems really need to be healthy, right? And so if we think about community capacity building or community problem solving or individual problem solving, we can all work really, 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 really hard and have the best of intentions. But if we don't understand kind of the foundational criteria and expectations of what our bodies actually need for ourselves and from other people, we can just end up getting really tired. We end up working really hard and getting really tired. So self-healing communities is this kind of community capacity building framework that everybody can just we can just do it, right? That we all get a little bit of choice and opportunity to lean in.
Amazing. So what does it mean to be a part of this movement to you, and like why did you get involved in this?
Yeah, great question. So why that's there's so many things there. So what it really means for me is hope. Is the idea that as we really understand more about ourselves and more about what the nervous system needs and expects from the world around it, like we can all work within our strengths and within our cultures and resources and relationships and practices to do the best that we can, right? Knowing that there is like no such thing as perfect, right? But we can all do better, right? Yeah, I mean, there was so much about, I probably for all of us, so much about our childhoods or where we come from that really just had this kind of like suck it up kind of mentality, that we're supposed to grow up to be completely independent and like asking for help is the sign of weakness and failure. But everything about what we understand about the body's expectations is that we're actually interdependent, right? That no matter how old I get, right, that my wellness and my wholeness really relies on large part of a relationship with you, right? And how we see each other and how we are together. Yeah.
And so you got introduced into this when or how? Like
certainly never anything that I ever would have imagined. So I had a very meandering path to graduate school. And then I had very different experiences. This is a little bit of a bunny trail, but hopefully it'll come back. I was almost 30 when I went back to graduate school. And so I was learning about neuroscience and brain development when I was pregnant with my first daughter. And so kind of, and now I had a second daughter during my postdoc, but kind of like their entire lifetimes, I've been a little bit obligated to like view their development through the lens of neuroscience. And just seeing all of the ways in which, the extraordinary ways in which we all matter to them, in their developmental experience and the opportunities that we had, that maybe other families didn't, or the opportunities that other families had that maybe we didn't. Anyway, and then so I decided that I wanted to do education and not research through meandering kinds of things. And so I got to Notre Dame. So this is something I never thought I would see myself doing. I got to Notre Dame in like the 2014-15 school year. The neuroscience behavior major was new. That was the first year of the major. I had no idea that anything like this even existed. Like there was nothing in my formal training that taught me about community-based work, community-based learning, community-based research, community coalition building. Like all of that I've learned since being here. And it was kind of these parallel conversations, right? I was hired to help start this major. I taught a developmental class. I learned that community-based learning was a thing. So I started doing some neuroscience community partnership stuff. Parallel to that, Beacon Community Impact in their health needs assessment identified childhood trauma as like the #2 health concern. They brought in the ACE interface. I had been in the community enough that I got looped into the ACE interface through some folks that were at Beacon Community Impact at the time. So I started doing the neuroscience training there. and kind of, right, it's kind of grown through
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? That like people in lots of different spaces being willing to ask courageous questions that get us closer to being able to lend our skills to addressing the root causes of so many of these
Yeah.
really heavy kind of critical social issues.
And like you said, there's so much hope in that, because all the issues can be overwhelming, and there could be despair of like, how do we even start by addressing this? And it can be done by just showing up a little bit better for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, right, that not only showing up, but that what we understand of the nervous system is it requires us all to show up, right? That if we continue to like excuse our responsibility and be like, oh, the school will take care of that. Oh, the doctor will take care of that.
Yeah.
We don't actually ever get better, right? And in fact, we can probably get a lot worse. Startling as that may sound, right? But the expectations of the nervous system require us to take responsibility for our role that we play in healing ourselves and healing each other.
That's so powerful. Okay. That is a perfect transition to ask, what is human resilience? Because resilience is a term that gets thrown around a lot in culture, and just saying, oh, you're resilient, you'll get over it, or human beings, they're so resilient, you move past it, like whatever. But that's not really what human resilience is. So could you talk more about that?
Yeah. So kind of a running theme across the different questions has been that a big frame shift, I think, for most of us is that the human body, the nervous system, the brain, the physiology of the human actually has expectations of its environment, right? And one of the most foundational and critical expectations for health and well-being across a lifespan is that of being in kind of positive, supportive, loving, consistent relationships, right? That everybody totally understands that we don't survive, right? Like babies won't live, toddlers won't live in the absence of care, but that we don't grow from being dependent to independent. We grow from being dependent to interdependent, right? That my nervous system, no matter how old I get, expects to be in relationship with the other people around me, right? And in the absence of that relationship, then I am harmed and we are harmed and we are all less than what we're capable of.
Yeah.
Because it's a violation of the expectation of the nervous system. And so this idea of resilience, right, kind of on the backdrop of like all of the things that have happened before any of us were ever born or around, kind of a cultural narrative that's evolved is this like, oh, you'll be fine, you know, just pick yourself up. It happens to everybody, right? The numbers of harms that are just excused by like, well, it happened to me and I am fine. And it happens to everybody. Just suck it up. It'll be okay, right? That the ignoring of the harm is not what makes us resilient, right? And I think we're seeing more and more that ignoring harm clearly makes us less well individually and culturally. That resilience, when I think about it from a nervous system perspective and when I think about it from a brain function perspective, is that there's never going to be a time, and there never has been a time for humans where there hasn't been hardship, where there hasn't been pain, where there hasn't been, right? So it's not about like making everything perfect, right? It's understanding that harm and hurt and pain are kind of obligate parts of the human experience. Resilience doesn't come from ignoring those, right? And dismissing them because they've always been around and they're always going to be around. Resilience comes from the understanding that these hardships are a part of life and being able to embrace each other through them so that it's not something that we try to like lock down and ignore, but that those experiences become integrated into kind of part of our broader, bigger whole, that we actually get to like grow through them and grow because of them, but only because, you know, because of relationship and joy and healing, right? That's the love that we receive and the people that are there to hold us through it and keep us afloat and help us repair, right? Then that's what grows our capacity. And that's really what resilience is. It's about growing through. Right.
And that is like the heart of this mission of Southland Communities.
And so that everybody gets to recognize I think a lot of people who have been through hurt, we carry a lot of shame. A lot of families and cultures and community carry a tremendous burden of pain across generations, and this ability to I don't know, it's maybe to give permission so that it's okay to grieve, and we are indeed stronger together, and all of these, you know, these cultural strengths that we can rely on to prop us up and to carry us through, and that everybody gets to play a role, and that everybody has a responsibility to play a role in that healing process. So
That's so powerful.
And that's what self-healing communities is all about. Like the mission of it and the movement of it is really about just being as clear as possible in terms of the universal expectations of human nervous system, right? If we want healthy kiddos, if we want healthy communities, if we want, you know, all of these things, and then we talk about in terms of wellness for all people, then there are non-negotiables when it comes to what the nervous system expects universally across humans, right? And then how do we think about creative, you know, policy, relationship, community practice, kind of within that. And I think that that's a kind of a gift of it too, is that we all get a role to play in that, and we're all of our strengths and experiences are required to contribute to figuring out what's going to be most successful.
We're asked to bring all of ourselves to it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael.
Sure.
This is awesome.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Okay. Thank you so much. Today we explored self-healing communities and human resilience. And we just want to say thank you again for sharing your time with us. Please make sure you're taking care of yourself and others today. And we will see you in the next episode. Just a reminder that this is sponsored by the self-healing communities of the Greater Michiana region. And if you have any more questions or want more information, please follow us at SHC Michiana or email us at selfhealingcommunities@gmail.com. And we would like to say thank you to Fabrice for providing the intro and outro music. Thank you.
Amazing.
I'm sorry you didn't get to hear the beautifulness of all of the music, but if you go to all of the platforms shown below, you will be able to play it. I do ask that you play it and then rate it. If you can give it a rating, then it'll show up on more platforms and it will be easier to find. The title of our podcast is the Self-Healing Collective. And I just want you to know that the whole team had a vote in it. We had a very rigorous voting.
Chalkboard voting, yes.
Chalkboard voting during our team meeting. And it was a beautiful just experience to be able to have the opportunity to finally let this be heard by the world. As I mentioned before, we will be launching this once a month at this time. One of the things that I always say is that once we start something, we want to be able to consistently do it. The fundraiser does help with this so that we can pay editors. Karina has done a fantastic job with the recordings and helping this all get to this point. And again, I'm just really excited. I got a lot of pushback a year before we even launched into it when I had the idea. But it's just, again, beautiful to see it here and hear Dr. Michael and Karina. And we have a lot of other guests that'll be coming. So again, thank you all. Check it out. And yes, I love the shout out to Karina. She did. We all get so happy remembering back when all of this was taking place. So yes, it's lovely. All right.
Awesome. So our next session will be at 6 p.m. in 5 minutes. Community capacity and your strengths. I'm going to stop sharing.